There's a number sitting in your bank account right now, and every single night while you sleep, it quietly gets smaller. Not the number on the screen, that part stays exactly the same. What shrinks is what that number can actually buy in the real world. For the first time in modern history, holding cash isn't the safe choice anymore. It's the slow, silent bleed that nobody ever warns you about. And the math behind it is so simple that once you finally see it, you can never unsee it again. My name is Marcos, and I've spent years obsessed with the quiet ways ordinary, responsible people lose money without ever making a single obvious mistake. Most financial advice still treats cash like a fortress, safe, solid, and completely untouchable. But that comforting idea belongs to a world that simply doesn't exist anymore. Today I'm going to show you, step by step, exactly why the era of cash is mathematically over and what quietly wealthy people do instead. If you want the real mechanics of money instead of the same recycled advice, watch this video until the end, because this is going to change how you see every dollar you hold. Let me paint you a picture that you already know far too well. You work hard, you spend less than you earn, and you do the responsible thing. You save. You watch that balance slowly climb month after month, and it starts to feel like safety itself. It feels like a wall standing between you and every disaster life could throw at you. There's a real physical comfort in seeing a big number just sitting there, untouched and waiting. Your shoulders drop, your breathing slows, and for a moment the anxiety about money goes quiet. But here's the cruel part that nobody ever prints on a motivational poster. That wall you built is made of sand, and the tide never ever stops coming in. While your cash sits perfectly still, the price of everything around it keeps climbing. Rent goes up, groceries go up, gas, insurance, even a cup of coffee, all of it creeps higher. You didn't lose a single cent on paper, and yet every year your money quietly commands a smaller slice of the world. It's the strangest kind of theft because there's no thief, no broken window, no moment you can point to. There's just a little less of you in every dollar, year after year after year. The first cracks always look harmless, almost too small to take seriously. By the time the loss finally feels real, years of quiet damage are already done. And here's the part that most people completely miss, and it might be the single most important idea in this entire video. Doing nothing with your cash is not a neutral, safe choice. It is an active, ongoing, guaranteed loss. You've just been trained not to see it. So let's talk about the actual math, because this is where it stops being my opinion and becomes pure arithmetic. Inflation across most developed economies has averaged somewhere around 3% a year over the long run. 3%. It sounds almost harmless, like a rounding error you could safely ignore. But money decays in exactly the same way it grows, through the quiet power of compounding. Let's slow down on that idea of compounding for a moment, because it cuts both ways. When your money grows, compounding is your loyal friend working quietly overnight. But when your money sits in cash, that exact same force turns and works against you. Let me make this concrete with a number you can actually feel. Imagine you have $50,000 sitting in cash, earning basically nothing, while prices rise 3% every year. After just 1 year, that 50,000 still proudly says 50,000 on the screen. But it now buys only what about $48,500 used to buy. After 10 years, its real purchasing power quietly drops to roughly 37,000. After 25 years, more than half of it has simply evaporated into thin air. And remember, you never made a single withdrawal. You never spent a dime of it. You weren't robbed in one dramatic moment that you'd remember forever. You were taxed slowly, silently, invisibly, every single day, while you felt completely safe. Here's a number that will really put all of this into perspective. The US dollar has lost over 90% of its purchasing power in roughly the last century. A dollar from your great-grandparents' era is worth just pennies in real terms today. That is not a wild conspiracy theory whispered on the internet. It is simply the designed, intended behavior of modern paper currency. Currencies are built to slowly lose value because a little inflation is baked into the entire system. The rules of this game were written long before you ever opened your first account, And in this game, cash is the one chip that is guaranteed to shrink while you're holding it. So the question stops being whether your cash is safe. The real question becomes how fast it is quietly leaking. Once you understand that, you can never look at a savings balance the same way again. It's the most boring force in all of finance, and also by far the most powerful. But the math is only half the story, and honestly, it's the easy half. The harder half is why we keep doing this to ourselves anyway. So if the math is this brutally obvious, why do smart, careful, intelligent people keep enormous piles of cash? The answer isn't hiding in a spreadsheet. It's wired deep inside your own brain. Human beings are built to fear losing far more than we enjoy gaining. Psychologists call this loss aversion, and it runs much deeper than simple logic. Losing $100 hurts about twice as much as finding $100 feels good. When you look at a pile of cash, your brain reads it as certainty, as control, as a problem already solved. Investing, by contrast, feels like raw risk, like exposure, like handing your safety over to strangers. So we instinctively cling to the thing that feels safe, even when it's quietly the most dangerous choice of all. Your ancestors survived by avoiding sudden danger, not by optimizing 30-year returns. That ancient wiring once kept them alive, but today it quietly keeps you poor. The feeling of safety and the fact of safety stopped agreeing a long time ago, and the gap between that feeling and the fact is exactly where your wealth leaks out. But here's where most people get this completely backwards, and I see it happen constantly. Cash feels stable to you for one simple reason: its number on the screen never moves, and that frozen number is exactly what fools you. The number is lying right to your face. The price tag out in the real world is the part that tells the truth, and that price tag never ever stops climbing higher. So what your brain has labeled as safety is actually a slow, silent, guaranteed leak. It's the one risk where you're almost certain to lose, just gradually enough that you never notice. Think for a second about how strange that really is. We will obsess over a stock that drops 2% in a single afternoon, but will happily ignore cash losing 30% of its power over a decade. The fast loss screams at us, while the slow loss only whispers, and we are wired to hear only the screaming. The wealthy simply learn to listen for the whisper. We treat a frozen number as proof of safety, when really it's proof that nothing is working for us. That is the entire difference, and it's a difference of psychology long before it's a difference of money. Now here's the idea that flips this whole thing on its head, and it might genuinely surprise you. The wealthy do not hold cash in order to store their value. They hold cash for one reason only: to deploy it. To them, cash isn't a safe harbor or a final destination. Cash is fuel, and fuel that just sits in the tank forever is completely wasted. Let me give you a picture that makes this impossible to forget. Imagine two people in the exact same city, with the exact same salary and the exact same $40,000 saved. The first person keeps every dollar of it in a savings account, quietly proud of how safe it all feels. The second person keeps a small cushion for emergencies, then puts the rest to work in assets that grow. Both of them feel responsible, both of them feel smart, both of them sleep just fine at night. Now let's fast forward 10 full years and look at the scoreboard. The first person still has roughly $40,000 sitting there, except it now buys noticeably less than it did a decade ago. The second person, even after living through crashes, panic, and chaos, has watched their money roughly double. Same starting line, same income, same effort, and yet two completely opposite destinies. The only real difference between them was understanding what cash is actually for. The person hoarding cash genuinely believed they were playing it safe. They thought they were playing rock-solid defense, but they were quietly losing the entire game in slow motion while feeling like the responsible one. Notice that neither of them did anything dramatic, flashy, or reckless. One person simply understood a basic rule, and the other never thought to question it. Small differences in understanding always grow into enormous differences in outcome. The safe-feeling path quietly became the expensive one, and this is the part nobody in finance really wants to say out loud. The safest feeling choice and the smartest choice are very often not the same thing. Comfort and growth almost never live in the same place. The wealthy simply made peace with a little discomfort in exchange for a lot of growth. That trade, repeated over a lifetime, is what quietly separates the two apartments. Let me show you the actual engine behind that gap because the numbers are almost unfair. Over the long arc of history, a broad basket of stocks has returned roughly 7% a year, even after you subtract inflation. Cash, after you subtract that same inflation, returns less than zero. That is not a small, narrow edge that barely matters. It's two powerful forces pulling in completely opposite directions. One quietly shrinks while the other quietly compounds. Picture two snowballs at the very top of the same hill. One is melting a little with every turn, getting smaller as it rolls. The other is gathering snow, getting bigger and heavier with every single rotation. Give them enough hill, and they end up in entirely different worlds. If you had put $10,000 into the broad market 30 years ago and simply left it completely alone, it would have grown many times over. That same $10,000 left sitting in cash would buy roughly half of what it once did. Same decade, same world, same starting amount, wildly different endings. Let me turn that 7% into something you can actually picture. At roughly 7%, money tends to double about every 10 years. At 0 or below, cash never doubles. It only quietly fades. So one person's money keeps doubling while the other person's keeps disappearing. Now stretch that out over 20, 30, even 40 years of a working life. The investor isn't just a little ahead, they're living in a completely different reality. And here's where the math gets genuinely exciting, almost addictive. The gap between them doesn't just add up over time, it accelerates. Every single year, compounding builds on a larger and larger base, so the distance between the saver and the investor doesn't widen in a straight line. It widens faster and faster and faster like a gap that feeds on itself. And the cruelest part is how completely invisible the whole process feels along the way. There are no alarms and no sirens, just two paths quietly splitting further apart. This is exactly why the wealthy seem to slowly pull away from everyone else over time. Time is the single most powerful force in all of finance, and cash, quietly and patiently, points that force in exactly the wrong direction. But here's the truth I really want you to walk away with today. This was never really a video about cash or inflation or percentages on a chart. It's about who you decide to become with the money you already have. Because when you stop seeing cash as the finish line, something quietly shifts inside you. You stop asking how to protect the little you have. And you start asking how to actually make it grow. You stop playing defense out of fear, and you start playing offense out of genuine understanding. That single shift changes how you think about every raise, every bonus, every unexpected dollar. Money stops being something you anxiously guard and becomes something you confidently direct. You start to feel a calm that no savings balance could ever give you, because real security was never the size of the number. Real security is knowing exactly what to do with it. You slowly become the kind of person who puts money to work instead of putting it to sleep. And that mindset, that identity, compounds even faster than any portfolio ever could. The wealth follows the person, not the other way around. You build the mind first, and the money learns to follow. Think about what that calm actually does to the rest of your life. You make far better decisions when you're not constantly operating from fear. You take smarter risks, you negotiate harder, and you think in decades instead of days. The money was always just a side effect of becoming that kind of person, and once you truly become them, going back almost feels impossible. That is the real transformation hiding behind all of these numbers. And it's available to you the moment you decide to see cash for what it truly is. So remember that number sitting in your account, shrinking quietly while you sleep? It really doesn't have to be that way anymore. The era of cash as a safe place to store your entire future is, mathematically, over. And quietly pretending otherwise only costs you, slowly, year after year. But here's the good news that should actually lift the weight off your shoulders. You don't have to gamble, and you don't have to be reckless to fix this. You simply have to stop treating cash like a destination and start treating it like a tool. Keep exactly what you need to feel safe and then put the rest to work. Because the person you become while doing that is worth far more than any balance you'll ever stare at. Start today because every single day you wait, the tide quietly takes a little more. Tomorrow's version of you is built by the decision you make right now. So make the one that your future self will thank you for. You've now seen the math, the psychology, and the proof with your own eyes. The only thing left is the decision, and that part belongs entirely to you. Knowledge without action changes absolutely nothing. And if this changed how you see your money, go watch this next video, because it just might change how you see stock crashes.